Thank you, everybody, for attending today's book launch event. I'm Hong Yuang, Professor of Curriculum Studies at Oklahoma State University on the Tulsa campus. The book, Curriculum as Lived, I'm trying to make it more clear. Currere, Mindfulness, and Nonviolent Companionship. I co-edited this book with Dr. Flory. It is the first volume in a new book series, Lived Experience, Nonviolence, and Curriculum Studies. It includes 25 educators' writings after their sustained engagement with the self, the other, including non-human other, and with the world. They describe inspiring, amazing, and heartfelt personal journeys that are embodied, emergent, and extraordinary, especially in today's turbulent time. And it's about the bridge between the inner work and outer work, affirming the central role of personhood and interconnectedness. This book is a testimony to the integrative power of nonviolence and nonviolence education. And today's lunch is actually the second part of this book lunch, and Dr. Flory hosted the first part 2 days ago. We have five authors joining us today, and I will ask them to introduce themselves briefly in the beginning of their presentations. As we all are from Tulsa, Oklahoma, or Tulsa area, we would like to acknowledge that the OLSU Tulsa campus is located on the reservation lands of Cherokee, Osage, and Muskogee Creek nations. Also, this Zoom meeting is recorded and will be uploaded to Nonviolence Education YouTube channel. It's a collection of individual videos, and it will appear probably next month. Next month, I will um, I will put the channel link into the chat later during the meeting, and you will find this video in that channel. So we will start with individual presentation. The first panelist is Cathy Bankston. Dr. Bankston, can you start?
Thank you, Dr. Wong. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you all for being here today, and I'm grateful for the opportunity. Um, my chapter was entitled Nonviolent Companionship, an Orchid, a Statue, and Faith. I was introduced to the term nonviolence as a PhD student about a decade ago. And what drew me to the elements of nonviolence was a deep connection to my own Christian spirituality. A nonviolence framework aligns beautifully with biblical teachings and solidified a concept that my own minister often says about Christianity, that it's a relationship, not a religion. Well, I had no idea that a companionship reflection exercise assigned in my curriculum studies class would provide an opportunity to explore ideas of connectedness beyond human relationships and deepen my own spiritual convictions. So, this chapter is a narrative of that exploration and application process. Well, the assignment was to spend time weekly with a non human entity and then reflect on that experience over the course of several weeks. I completed this assignment actually 2 different times over 2 different courses with Dr. Wong. And I documented both in the chapter in the book. But for this purposes of today, I will highlight the first experience, which really had the most dramatic outward outcome and gave me my name that a few close friends know as the Orchid Whisperer. So I chose to spend time with a native Hawaiian orchid plant that I had sent my mom from Hawaii. I lived in Hawaii, and I had sent it to her 10 years before this assignment. Well, the plant had never produced flowers after its initial blooms, which was very disappointing. But my mom faithfully put the 5 ice cubes. You're supposed to put 5 ice cubes in it weekly and keep it in the morning sun only. And she was faithful for 10 years to do this. So I got the orchid plant, and without any direction, which I think was the point really of what to do, but just spend time, I took a book that I was reading for a class. I set the orchid plant on the table the first week, and I simply read my book and just looked at the orchid every now and then with literally no emotional or any kind of really response at all. So then the second week, I thought, I got to have to do something because I'm going to have to write a paper on this. And I sure don't, I need to do something here. But anyway, I started looking at it. I thought about it had these gorgeous, thick green leaves. They were long and lush. And I'm like, why aren't you blooming? Why haven't you bloomed for 10 years? And then I kind of had a little anger. I actually had a little emotion there. I was like, why didn't you do, my mom hasn't got any orchids from you. So then the third week, I began to sympathize with it, thinking about my own life and how, yes, there are many times where there was very little productivity. And sometimes just I was content not to produce. So by the fourth week, and I kid you not, I was stroking its leaves and I was talking to it and I was telling it, it's okay if you never bloom again. We still love you. But when you're ready to bloom, please do. And that was sort of the recap briefly of that experiment. Well, from then on, anytime I passed that orchid, it sat on the kitchen counter above the kitchen sink, I would stroke its leaves and just tell it how beautiful it was. So you may be able to see where this story is going. But in about 3 months, my mom one day said, come look at this. And she said, what is this? And a long, slender stem had shot up overnight. And it had these 5 little bumps on it. And she's like, what is this? We haven't seen this. And yes, those eventually became orchids. And for the past 10 years and now more, it blooms 3 to 4 times a year. It almost always has blooms on it. So there you have that. Well, to share some implications from this time, I'll share one academic implication and one spiritual one. Well, first, broadening my capacity to appreciate unreciprocated connections, that was key there, has not only deepened my compassion for students who, as you can imagine, don't always reciprocate in the classroom, but it has developed my compassion for students and others, but also challenged me in the way I developed curriculum, which before that was more of a closed design with specific expectations, an expectation for a blooming orchid, if you will. But instead, I tried to open up some spaces for experience, for more organic conversations, other voices, to create opportunities for unplanned activities, responses, and imaginative play. The second implication of the companionship exercises was sort of a deeper awareness of the presence of God within my Christian beliefs. Had I allowed my initial skepticism to cloud my openness of the companion project, I would have missed out on an unexpected and mystical lesson on relationship at a spiritual level. A lesson that allowed me to look past the confines of what we call the unimaginative world, a world that does not believe in friendship with orchids and statues. That was my second one. Or sometimes even God. But there I was sitting at the kitchen table wondering how I'm going to commune with an orchid plant. And the same can be said for me with God sometimes. So to close, Nagler wrote in his book that failures of imagination can be reversed, which is very hopeful for me and something I took away from this. For me, that imagination can lessen negative emotions, unfair expectations in relationships, selfish desires. I want the orchid to bloom, and invite something greater into my life. So thank you for listening.
Thank you, Cathy. I want to briefly mention Cathy is a professor at Tulsa Community College.
I forgot to introduce myself. Yes.
Yeah. Okay, next, Tifanie.
Hey, good afternoon. I'm currently a PhD student at Oklahoma State University in the Social Foundations of Education program. And before I start, I want to thank Dr. Wong for inviting me to be a part of this project. Also, I wrote out what I wanted to share about this chapter, and I'm reading it because often when I get anxious, my mind goes blank. So I appreciate your understanding. I want to begin with a question that sits at the heart of this chapter. What does it mean to practice mindfulness when the body doesn't experience inward attention as peace, but as threat? That question matters to me personally, professionally, and ethically. It's the reason I wrote this chapter. Mindfulness is often spoken of in generous and hopeful terms. It's described as calming and centering and restorative, and it can be. But what I wanted to do in this chapter was to interrupt any easy or universalized account of mindfulness by speaking from lived experience. I wanted to name what happens when trauma lives in the nervous system, when PTSD is activated, and when a practice intended to heal can, at least unintentionally, intensify distress. This chapter isn't about mindfulness as a practice. It's about the conditions. Wow, I'm not sure what's going on there, but the light just came on. Sorry about that distraction. So I wanted to name what happens when it unintentionally can intensify distress. So this chapter isn't simply about mindfulness as a practice. It's about the conditions under which healing, agency, and nonviolence become possible. For those of us who work in education, in the helping professions, in peace studies, and in nonviolence leadership, I believe this matters deeply. Because if the nervous system is overwhelmed, if the body is organized around hypervigilance, if one's inner world is narrowed by threat, then the capacity to pause, reflect, and respond with intention is also narrowed. In that sense, trauma is never merely private. It has pedagogical, relational, and moral implications. One of the central claims of the chapter is that if mindfulness is to be genuinely humane, it must be trauma-informed. In my own experience, some formal mindfulness practices, especially practices that required sustained attention to internal bodily sensations, didn't immediately create calm. They heightened distress and intensified trauma responses. Reflecting on that experience was key because it exposed a truth that many people living with trauma already know in their bodies. Not every healing practice is going to heal in the same way, at the same time for every person. That realization moved me toward a different understanding of mindfulness. Not as a fixed formula, not as a universal good in a universal form, but as a practice that must be shaped within the boundaries of one's personal levels of safety, thresholds, capacities, and context. A line in the chapter that remains pivotal for me is, I was not broken. I was having normal responses to my lived experiences and the impact of meditation after prolonged, intense, and multiple acute PTSD activating life events. That sentence marks a shift. It's the point at which shame begins to loosen, self-blame gives way to understanding, and it's the point at which compassion becomes possible. This matters not only at the level of individual healing, but also at the hinge pin pivot of nonviolence. Nonviolence, if it's to be more than an aspiration, must include the ways we relate to woundedness, to vulnerability, and to the dysregulated self. It must include questions of how we create the internal and relational conditions under which a person can respond rather than merely react. A phrase attributed to Viktor Frankl that resonates strongly with this point states, "Between stimulus and response, there's a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom." I hear that line in part as a description of moral and spiritual possibility, and I hear it through the realities of trauma. Trauma can constrict that space, make the body move toward survival before reflection is possible, and compress that freedom into reactivity. And so, one of the deepest insights I carry from this work is that trauma-informed mindfulness can help widen that space again. When that space widens, even slightly, something changes. There is more room for awareness, discernment, compassion, and nonviolent presence. For me, that widening didn't come from forcing myself into practices that overwhelmed me. It came from learning to work within safety and recognizing the importance of anchors, especially external anchors. It came from understanding that dysregulation is not a weakness, that adaptation is not failure, and that individualized care is not a lesser form of practice, but it's often necessary. It's often the necessary path toward healing. So the biggest takeaway I might offer from this chapter is that healing requires more than intention. It requires attunement. It requires us to ask not only what's the practice, but also for whom, under what conditions, at what cost, and toward what kind of freedom. If we are serious about peace, nonviolence, and human flourishing, then we must also be serious about trauma, embodiment, and the nervous system. We must care about the inner conditions that shape how people meet the world, how they bear suffering, and how they come into relationship with themselves and others. This chapter is my attempt to contribute to that conversation with honesty, not by offering a formula or romanticizing healing, but by insisting that trauma-informed mindfulness is not peripheral to the work of nonviolence. It's part of it. And when we learn, however imperfectly, to widen the space between stimulus and response, we not only make healing more possible, we also make freedom, compassion, and nonviolence more possible. Thank you again for this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Tifanie. Next is Emily Mortimer.
Hi, thank you. I'm honored to be a part of this event and to share this chapter with you. My name is Emily Mortimer. I earned my PhD in curriculum studies in 2021 under the mentorship of Dr. Wong, whose guidance profoundly shaped both my scholarship and this chapter. I currently serve as a vice president of ecosystems for the Tulsa Regional STEM Alliance based here in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I am going to read a lot of this just because I might cry. I'm just going to be honest with you. This piece began many years ago in a class with Dr. Wong. My father had just passed away the first week of that semester. It was a very raw and disorienting moment of grief. Dr. Wong approached me with extraordinary compassion and offered to adapt our Currere assignment so I could focus the process on memories of my father. That generosity gave me something I didn't even know I needed at the time, a way to process grief through reflection, memory, and writing. What began as an academic assignment became something far more profound, a way for me to preserve my father, understand his lasting influence on me, and begin making meaning from this loss. Now, many years later, this remains one of my most precious and most vulnerable pieces of writing. My dad was a quiet, deeply kind man. He stood 6'6" tall, and he was literally strong as an ox. I remember him rolling giant round bales of hay across our field on our farm. He was intelligent. He was capable of building or fixing anything. And he had this beautiful, sneaky, dry sense of humor that would always catch us off guard in all the best ways. He was not expressive with hugs or words. I never actually remember him telling me he loved me when I was a kid. But I never once doubted his love. He taught through action, through steadiness, and through presence. Like I think many of us, it was not until after losing him did I begin to understand how much of him truly lived inside me. One of the earliest memories that I revisit in this chapter is of walking with him in the woods near our farm in Missouri. I wrote, I remember as a young child following him into the woods to places where we would sit calm, patient, and silent. He told me to be quiet and listen. I heard strange sounds around me, but I wasn't worried. He seemed so calm and peaceful, and so did I. It was a peace that would radiate through my body every time I was in the forest with him. As a child, I experienced these moments simply as being with my dad. But through Currere, I came to understand that these were also lessons in patience, observation, and the strength of silence. These lessons remain with me still. In leadership, in teaching, and in parenting, I often find myself pausing to first observe, to listen before act. Only later did I realize that instinct was really because of being in the woods with him. That is one of the deepest gifts of Currere. It asks us not only to merely remember the experience, but to reinterpret it. What once seemed ordinary becomes newly visible as formative. In revisiting these memories, I began to understand that the people who shape us become part of the curriculum we carry into every classroom, every relationship, and every way of teaching. In the final weeks, this is the one I really have to try hard to get through. In the final weeks of my father's life, he was determined to complete his grandfather book for my son. One day, we came to the question, what would you like to teach your grandson? In the chapter, I write, he looked at me, nodding to go ahead. What would you like to teach your grandson? I saw my dad trying to bring himself to talk, but soon tears were running down his cheek. I got up from my chair and went to him. We sat in his chair with my arms wrapped around his shoulders. Both of us crying, neither one able to talk. Finally, we gathered our emotions, wiped our tears, and he answered, to teach him to use tools. That sentence has stayed with me ever since. He was not simply speaking about hammers or wrenches. He meant the deeper tools for living, how to solve problems, how to build something that lasts, how to persist when things break, and how to become capable and self-sufficient in the world. Writing this chapter helped me recognize how deeply that lesson shaped me, not only as a daughter, but as an educator and a leader. My instinct to teach through experience rather than instruction comes directly from him. Another revelation that came through remembering his workshop in our basement. I described it in this way in my chapter. There were gears, there were motherboards, parts, circuits, odometers, and many other things I had no idea what they were used for. Everything was always in its place. He had manuals, so many manuals for computers, for printers, for tools, for schematics. And sometimes I think he would just have random manuals that detail on how to do anything, perhaps even build a rocket. That was his own classroom. It taught me something I now carry deeply into my educational philosophy, that learning is not confined to formal instructions. Real instruction happens in forests, in workshops, in kitchens, in conversations, in grief, and in relationships. That understanding transformed how I see my pedagogical self, not as something limited to schools, but as something enabled in the lived human experience. In writing this chapter, what I believe this book very beautifully demonstrates through all the chapters is that curriculum is never only what happens in classrooms. Curriculum is the culmination of our lived experiences in and out of traditional classrooms. Curriculum also lives in memory, grief, relationships, and inheritance. Sharing this chapter now feels like opening a deeply personal archive, but it also reminds me that our most valuable stories are often our most meaningful teachers. Through Currere, I came to understand that my father's lessons did not end with his death. They became a part of the lived curriculum I now carry into my work, my teaching, and my parenting. And even now, when I pause in silence before making a difficult decision, I sometimes think I am still sitting beside him in those woods, learning to listen. Thank you.
Wow.
Thank you, Emily, for sharing such a deeply personal story with us. All right, next, Naomi. You're muted. You're muted, Naomi.
Yeah, excuse me. Thank you. That was beautiful, Emily. I hope I don't get verklempt. So my book chapter is Songs of My Mother. It's chapter 4. And so I'm really grateful to be included in Hong Yu's book. It's an opportunity to tell stories that widen my understanding, and at present sits at an intersection of memory, multiple points of view, a nonviolent lens, and analysis. It has widened my personal understanding of myself and my mother. So several events kind of happened in intersection before I began to think or write for this book, or for the book. My mother died in 2011. And before that time, I interviewed her and transcribed some of our conversations. I intended to tell her story through these vignettes that I was going to weave together somehow, even though I didn't know how. And therefore, the writing sat for a while. The interview sat for a while. I enrolled in grad school in 2012. I was introduced to Currere, feminisms, nonviolence through Dr. Wong, and other ideas that were new to me. I'd never heard them before. And I was taught to improve my thinking and writing skills. So I began to have a way to actually express myself. In 2022, I had a disagreement with my adult daughter about her perception of grandma, which clashed with how I wanted her to remember my mother. So some of these things are interlacing together. My daughter was getting married, and we were in the car together, and I'm sharing a story about how when I got married, my parents wouldn't pay for my wedding because they either couldn't or wouldn't. And that was deeply hurtful to me, but I guess I just never tried to present it in that fashion. So my mother was especially brutal in her reaction to my engagement. But I didn't tell my daughter, nor had I in any of the retellings of these vignettes, that this is how I felt. So the genesis of this argument that my daughter and I are having in the car is that I had never told her the other part of the story. I had never told her how I had reacted to it or how it deeply impacted me, because I really think I just shoved it down and buried it. So my daughter now is adamantly and loudly telling me that her grandmother was cold. And that's confusing me, because I'm thinking, no, she wasn't. She did so much changing in her life, and she did. So I felt myself recoil from the realities of my daughter's words. I felt hurt from my mother, but I had never confronted my mother about how hurt I was. And I had never tried to represent my mother in a hurtful way to my children. So, but now I'm crying in the car, and I was conflicted and upset and angry, but I wasn't exactly sure why. I was very uncomfortable, and I wanted to stop feeling that way. So nonviolence teaches me to sit with the tension until meaning can be made, which is difficult for me. difficult maybe for all of us. The tension does not have to destroy me. And I could allow myself to process, search, and find the knots of personal discomfort. So then I embarked on a Currere process. This is well after graduation. So it's not for a class. This is for me. To re-examine some of my mother's stories. From her stories, I have like 15 of them. From those stories, I selected 3 that were especially connected to her education, her view of her teachers, etc. And then I examined and I thought about it and I processed over and over again and I rewrote multiple times. My story of my mother emerged, and multiple layers of understanding was my discovery to search for the story that delved deeper than my former Hollywood narrative of my mother. Her stories inspired me to examine some of my stories that were also deeply hidden, and that results in the book chapter. Oh, I forgot to tell you, I was a longtime teacher, 37 years, and I presently am an adjunct at TCC and OSU. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Naomi. Jennifer, it's your turn.
All right. I am not going to cry. But if Emily cried, I feel like it's okay for me to cry now. Thank you for breaking that, Emily. My name is Jennifer Williams. I'm a doctoral candidate at OSU. I am nearing the end, you all. Yes, the end is in sight. And I'm going to read from my chapter because I have built on my chapter for my dissertation, and I was afraid that I was going to refer to the dissertation and not the book chapter. So I figured it was just safer to just read some snippets from my chapter instead of foraying into my dissertation. Initially, I did not choose nonviolence willfully. I thought it was kind of a lovely ideal. Maybe it's a place that privileged people. You know, when you don't have a whole lot of conflict in your life, you can choose to be nonviolent. That's where I started out in this journey. It intellectually did not make sense to me. But the more I read and the more chances I had to try implementing mindfulness practices into my life, the more I realized how right it was for me. It actually did make a lot of sense. It felt like I was waking up. My life could be different and I could be different. As I decided to walk this path, I realized outer nonviolence would not be enough. I had to be nonviolent with and within myself. As I reflect on the last several years, I see how Currere and embracing mindfulness have helped and continue to help me unlearn and engage in the daily work of learning and unbecoming and rebecoming who I am. In my chapter, I discussed 3 experiential projects I engaged in as part of my graduate coursework. They gave me opportunities to face parts of my shadow, referring to Jungian psychoanalysis. That shadow was a stranger within myself, and as a nonviolent act of embracing all parts of myself and as part of my work toward becoming whole. I had to laugh when I looked at my chapter, you all. I don't know how Dr. Wong didn't just shake me a little bit. I squeezed in an awful lot, and I probably should have edited, but there was so much that was happening at that time. My first project was a letter to my body. I had carried a lot of hateful feelings toward my body since childhood, and I thought if I was going to start being more nonviolent with myself, that I needed to start, I thought, an easy place. I'll write a letter to my body. It seemed so, easy at the time. The first paragraph was, "Dear body, writing this, I am fighting tears. Who knew it would be so difficult to talk to myself? Okay, it's not hard to talk. The difficulty is in being honest. You have been part of my shadow without me completely realizing so. How did I make it to my 40s, now 50, with us almost constantly at war? I know I am not the only person struggling, but I need to focus on our problems so we can find some peace. I need to fully accept and affirm you so I can fully accept and affirm others." And then I just wrote paragraphs about, from childhood on, some of the difficulties I'd had with being fully embodied and why I had tried so much to disassociate from myself. And I'll end that section with this last paragraph where I had 40s to the present. here we are, halfway through the 40s. Thanks to reading and learning about nonviolence, I'm finally facing you. No lies, no pretense. We've been going back and forth, trading shots. I can't fight you and still embrace nonviolence. I don't want to just call a truce. I really want to find peace with you. The last couple of weeks have been better, I think. I'm trying to listen to you, to rest when you're tired, to push a little further when I think you can take it, to exercise, to drink more water. I exercised the other day because you wanted to, even though my brain wanted to be lazy. And the exercise felt pretty good. I can't promise you everything will be wonderful, but I do promise to work on loving you more, taking better care of you, and working together to bring peace to our life. Hopefully, we will have several more decades together. I think we can make them good ones if we're willing to try. So that was that section. I talked a lot about how different mindfulness practices have helped me. I really like body scanning now that I'm trying to be more embodied. And since I deal with a chronic illness, it helps me also kind of keep in check with what's going on with my body and to listen to it more. And then I wanted to end with this little piece. This is kind of where I've started my dissertation. Dr. Wong once asked us to bring in an artifact that kind of represented who we were. And I brought in the book Frankenstein. And it's something I have taught and something that I've told my students, the same story that I'm going to share with you all. So I once said I seemed like Frankenstein's monster because I felt I was pieced together from mismatched parts. I was ugly and did not fit into society. Ironically, I am also Frankenstein because, like the Dr. Frankenstein versus the monster, I'm also Dr. Frankenstein because I actively embraced characteristics valued by society, and I made myself into something I did not think I could love or be loved. Who needed love when I could have power? Yet, violence is an avoidable insult to human needs, as Nagler says. I committed such violence against myself by denying myself the human need to have, feel, and express emotions, and the need for connection to others in the world around me. I continued this pattern of self-violence because woundedness lies at the roots of violence within ourselves and others and within our culture. Active nonviolence comes face to face with these wounds, according to Harrison Morrison. And only through active nonviolence could I face the deep wounds within myself, face the parts I forced into the shadow and denied existed. Sorry about that. And begin realizing my true self, my place in the interconnected world. So this chapter was kind of an amalgamation of parts, kind of like I felt like I was to Frankenstein's monster. But it was amazing how much healing I got just through assignments that I did in grad school, and then how I've been able to continue on that work. I almost didn't recognize some of that writing. I was like, did I write that chapter? Because I've, changed even. I'm sure some of you are nodding along. Yeah, I've changed even from when I wrote this. But it was amazing how unwilling I was and drug my feet. And now, yeah, I'm wholeheartedly about nonviolence, and I'm a completely different person than I was even 5 or 10 years ago. So that's my work. I think I remember to introduce myself. My brain went blank there for a second. I think I introduced myself. Thank you, Dr. Long, and thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Jennifer. That's wonderful. Well, knowing each of you and your individual journeys, I'm still very much touched and inspired by hearing you talking about it in this book lunch. And thank you, all of you, for being willing to share this intimate part of yourself and share it with the public to inspire others as well. So we have some audience here who joined the meeting. Do you have any comments or questions for one of the panelists, or several or all of them? Just feel free to start a conversation. You can put it in the chat. You can talk directly.
I think my question would be for all of you, and it actually is something that Jennifer said just now as she was wrapping up. But I'm just wondering, as time has passed since you wrote those chapters, and some of that even adapted from earlier work before that, that the statement about how you have continued to change over time, I'm thinking about that as a space that I'm curious, as you were preparing for this presentation and rereading your chapters and thinking about the seeds of those chapters, wherever they emerged years ago in coursework or other things. I'm just curious, do you have any thoughts to share about your own reflection of ongoing transformation or the work of nonviolence in your lives beyond the chapters that you wrote that have continued?
Anyone feel free to jump in.
Well, I can start to continue a little bit of an orchid metaphor, if you'll allow. But most recently, for those that have followed the orchid plant for the last 10 years, it produced, a few months ago, it produced 2 stems with 6 orchids each, which has never done 2 at a time. And then they all fell off. And then another stem came out, and it has only 3 blooms. And the plant does look tired and old. It's over 20 years. And I was thinking, reflecting on, again, on where I'm at in my teaching, not quite at retirement, but could be, facing some of that and thinking about the 3 orchid blooms. Things are going to change. And I think if I'm going to keep the plant going, I'm going to have to probably repot it. It's been untouched for 10 years in this pot. And I was thinking about myself as well, as far as, at some point in life, there will be another shift here, and how these exercises and even maybe it's been so long since I thought about Currere. I'm going to have to revisit the process, but it could be about time to, as if I'm transitioning here at some point, to revisit that and think about a new pot and what life might look like in that way. So that's something that's been on my mind.
That's a wonderful statement, Cathy. I think about what you're talking about in spaces of difficulty. Curriculum and curriculum methods can help us. So I think what I didn't really say in what I read to the group was that when my daughter and I are having this fight in the car, she and I had just spent 2 years not talking to each other, which was very painful for me. And then now we're having deeper conversations, which bring out pain that I'm unwilling to face. So when I began to be strong enough to face what she was saying and to accept it, then I could look deeper into myself to find the places that were uncomfortable, broken, and hurt, and deal with that. And the writing of it has really helped me. I write over and over and over again, and then I read over and over, and that really has helped me. I also began to write about other relationships that have been problematic for me, and that's really helped me to either understand or to put them on hold a little bit better.
I'll quickly mention I was able to continue that letter to my body thanks to perimenopause. And yeah, I know several of you are laughing along with me. I realized I still had a whole lot of unresolved issues. Thank you, perimenopause. But it has helped me work through some of those, and revisited a book that I had set aside because it was talking about radical self-love. And I was like, oh no, I am not in a position for that yet. But recently I finished that book and have included some of that even in my dissertation. So yeah, you think you're done with things, and then you're like, oh wait, no, the world has thrown me another curveball. But I do think from all the work I've done, I'm approaching things differently. Yes, putting on weight for perimenopause was a huge shift, but I didn't quite enter some of those dark places like I had, younger in my life when I was dealing with body issues. So yeah, it's definitely been incredible to continue. As Dr. Wong says, the work is never done, right?
I think for some of mine, it's about time. For part of my graduate studies that last year, my dad's life, I was in school, and so we'd be reading these books. And, there's parts of nonviolence education that talk about where you are situated in your own timeline. So living in the past, the present, the future. And I remember getting very angry about not wanting to be in my present at that time because the situation I was in and my dad was in. And I think revisiting this chapter now has helped to frame that in a way of being able to appreciate moments like that and being able to know when to go back into my past to pull the love or maybe the grief or the memories to better understand or be empathetic to what I'm experiencing now. But then also allowing myself the openness to not have to absorb constantly the past, that there are moments where I can't fully live in the present, or be able to look forward to the future, but just helping to reorient myself to where it doesn't always feel like I'm trying to live in all three timelines at once, but I can intentionally decide what would make the most sense and be the healthiest place for myself and for the others that I'm around.
Oh, sorry, can I ask a question? Yeah. Thank you, Alfie, for sharing because your sharing is so moving, meaningful, and resonating with me. Especially I have the question for Tifanie because thank you for sharing because you mentioned trauma is morally private. It has pedagogical and relational and moral implication. So I want to always I will think what does a mindfulness for different people has a different meaning. So I want to know, in your opinion, what is a main link that allow mindfulness to play a key role in an individual trauma healing process?
I'm not sure I understand the question that you're asking because I did talk about the moral and the pedagogical. Yeah. So, but I'm not sure what your question is.
Okay, I put in the chat.
Okay. Thanks. Let's see. In your opinion, what is the main link or pivotal moment that allows mindfulness to play a key role in an individual's trauma healing processes? Ooh, well, it's very individual. There needs to be a willingness, an inside the person, a willingness to be curious, not just be curious, but a willingness to begin to be curious, a willingness to experiment, a willingness to open up enough to begin to feel safety.
Mhm.
And once you build some sense of safety and support, then you can begin to trust. So I don't know if I'm answering your question, so you can ask me again if I'm not, or you can ask me another question. But I think it's that finding that sense of safety has to come first. I had a couple classes with Dr. Wong, and I also had some groundwork, going to therapy, learning how to show up for myself, what it meant to show up for myself, learning how to have compassion, going, oh my gosh, yeah, that was a really hard thing. That was really scary. Learning how to hold myself. All those things that I wanted from other people, I slowly began to give to myself. I realized that those things were already in there. So instead of looking for it externally, I could find it. And being hurt when I'd reach out for that in my life, I found it internally. It was that pausing on purpose, right? Without judging and just learning to notice what joy felt like in my body, separating out also uh, physical sensations from biological sensations. We love it. For example, we love the word hangry. It's really appropriate. And at the same time, it's that combining of hungry and angry. I needed to first recognize hunger so that then I could recognize, oh, that's the cue. That's us kind of causing some agitation. So did that answer your question? I don't know. Again.
Thank you. Thank you.
Lisa, I don't want to put you on the spot, but what if I ask the same question you asked to the panelists?
Yeah.
Because you were one of the authors for the book, and what has the further journey meant to you to deal with some of the tensions originally in the writing?
I was thinking about my own answer in wanting to ask the question. Like Emily, I write about my father's the end of his life and his death, and that was a very painful and traumatic experience. And in my writing, I examine practices of nonviolence that I had become familiar with and valued and believed I was beginning to integrate. And yet in this very, very difficult experience, felt I was not as proficient of practicing those in this space where I wanted to practice them. And so I had a lot of judgment of myself. And in the writing, I think I was able to think about the places where actually I was practicing nonviolence into whatever extent possible, but also to be able to name the spaces of violence, but also to be able to name the practices of nonviolence that either were emerging or in some cases I really struggled to practice. And so now my father has been gone 8 years, and my mother is doing well, but her life in these last few years has created a lot of trauma as we've moved her from a large home into independent living, and a lot of things, saying goodbye to the home that they lived in, that I grew up in for 50 years. There's been a lot of traumatic interpersonal relationships in the kind of death of that part of her life and that part of our family life. And between me and my 3 sisters, as we have had to do all that work. And I think what I have reflected on and the benefit of the chapter and the ongoing work is, I think, both naming the violence that occurred in my father's death, the social, emotional, relational, psychological violence that happened, and also thinking about the ways in which I wanted to practice nonviolence authentically in that moment, and felt the tension of that work. I find I am leaning on now as I engage with my mother. And I think just one example, the last 2 weeks of my father's life, the hospice bed in the dining room and all the medical interventions that were required. I physically went through the motions of that, but continuously felt the desire to pull away and be absent, to just be mechanical and not be fully present to the trauma, or to the opportunity to be present and integrate the internal, the external. And there's been a lot of different but traumatic experiences now with my mother, and I find myself really wanting to be present, to practice that presentness as just the first one level, just to be present in that, and then also to be able to hold the tension in the discomfort and those kinds of things. So the work of that chapter to reflect, I think, is continuing to be beneficial. And also I'm a different person now also, 8 years later, and I'm continuing to learn. And so I think that is a way that I find the work is ongoing in me.
That's beautifully said. Thank you, Lisa. Any other questions or comments to each other? All right. Thank you very much. And wish you well in your ongoing journeys forward. Okay, bye.